Okay, hello, I'm Roisin McNaney, and I'm going to be talking about our paper on exploring perceptions of cross-sectoral data sharing with people with Parkinson's. This was a multidisciplinary collaboration between authors at Monash University in Australia, University of Bristol in the UK, and University of Pittsburgh in the US. And it's much of a part of a much larger package of work that's currently ongoing at Bristol. So our motivation to focus this work on Parkinson's is the fact that capturing continuous and long-term data in Parkinson's is particularly important. And that's because symptoms are usually transient, they can fluctuate depending on the time of the day. So the snapshot view that you would often get when you're doing a face-to-face clinical assessment isn't always representative of the person's daily functioning. So if we can capture longitudinal data in a non-obtrusive way, using, for example, a sensor-based approach, then this can be particularly beneficial. And for us, we had access to an expertise around smart home sensing. And we had clinical expertise to annotate the data and access to the participants themselves. So we were very, very lucky to have this fully instrumented smart home and the technical and clinical expertise around it. So the data set that we were planning to collect, therefore, was really valuable. And this got us thinking about how useful it would be to be able to actually share this type of data set across health, pharma, medical technology sectors, and then, of course, with other academic researchers. But we wanted to know how people with Parkinson's would actually feel about sharing this type of data, particularly across these different sectors. So primarily in this work, we wanted to understand how people with Parkinson's felt more broadly about smart home data and how it might capture information about their daily living and their symptoms. How people with Parkinson's feel about data sharing, and in particular, sharing across different sectors, and then how we as researchers might be able to have better conversations and engage health communities more around data and data sharing. So to answer our questions, we first wanted to give participants a solid idea of what data we might be able to actually collect in Smart Home, given that this was going to be our the topic of our study. So we asked 12 people, 6 pairs, 6 with Parkinson's and their spouses who were roughly age matched, to come into the Sphere House, which you can see lots of pictures of on the screen, at Bristol, and collect some data. So Sphere House is a fully furnished test bed, fully furnished house, which is a test bed that's been embedded with a range of different sensors, so the sensor platform. This includes things like ambient sensors that collect temperature and humidity, light, electricity sensors on the different appliances, flow sensors for water, silhouette cameras for detecting human motion, but in a privacy sensitive way, and you'll see some silhouettes on the next slide, and then a wearable device for capturing activity and helping with things like indoor location. So what we did was bring our groups of participants into the house, and we asked them to do like a day and fast forward, so complete activities like cooking, cleaning, rolling over in bed, getting up and down from a chair, different things like that. And we've published around the classification of this data elsewhere. You can see some references there on the screen. So the intention of this work was more to look at how people felt about this data, the data that we were capturing, and how combining this data with other types of data might influence their perceptions of data sharing, and with who and in what circumstances they would want to actually share this data in. So we brought the participants in and we ran some workshops with them to explore the data that we'd collected in the house. We showed them some different visualizations and verbally talked through the data and what we could figure out from this data. And then we asked them questions around who they would share this with, and if they were to combine it with different data that we might collect as part of a larger scale clinical trial, like rating scales, symptom diaries, things like how often they leave the house or use the bathroom or cook a meal or whatever, and who they might share this with, and in what caveats might be around that data. So we were looking in particular at big tech, pharma, different health professionals, researchers, and then other smaller medical technology companies with products for Parkinson's. So the main findings showed us that participants could see lots of opportunities for themselves to use the smart home data, so tracking their symptoms over time, helping them figure out when they need their next dose of medication, or more generally just getting a better insight into their condition. But when it came to sharing this data, participants were, of course, happy to share it with organizations they felt were trustworthy, and they had open and transparent procedures around data management, like universities, health services. But this wasn't seen to be the case in other sectors like industry. So I felt there was often blanket consent, and this wasn't enough. So I wanted more control and information about who would access their data and how it would be used. And a lot of this hesitancy around data sharing with industry was related to the possibility of data misuse. So it was acknowledged that, of course, the chance of malicious use of their data is quite small, but there's a possibility that they could be disadvantaged in some way. So insurance companies, for example, might use cohort level data on Parkinson's to drive up the price of travel, or the DVA could use this type of data to make population level decisions on how long they would let somebody with Parkinson's keep a driving license. So the possibilities for data misuse were there, and their understanding of how data flowed across different sectors and industries was actually more so built on people with Parkinson's own experiences of for-profit data sharing practices and targeted advertising. So this concept of selling data for profit actually brought up some really interesting discussions around particularly how smaller companies might be less stable than larger scale companies, because they potentially have changing hands and changing heads of the companies, and the data might go with them. So if the company is sold on and seen to be less stable, then potentially the data could go with somebody who then has different values to what they'd signed up with in the first place. So the big tech was seen a little bit like better the devil you know. So in terms of future work, firstly, engaging people in these types of discussions is important and useful, as is considering the different possibilities for data sharing that might happen with these highly valuable data sets. Contributors that we talk to are happy to share their data as long as they're informed of how it'll be used, who will be able to access it, and as long as they can retain a sense of control over their data. So this needs to be considered early on in research, because we need to be able to configure data infrastructure accordingly for this. Thank you.